Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is Eruvin Daf Lamed Beis. We're on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. At the last line on the bottom, it says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, Bishal Torah, when something involves it in Torah, Ein chazaka shliach oiseh shlichusai. You cannot employ a chazaka, presumption that a shliach will actually carry out a shlichus. Just because you appointed somebody as an emissary to perform a specific task, there's no knowing with certainty that he'll do the job that you entrusted him with. Perhaps he thinks, well, you asked me, but maybe you asked somebody else as well. Maybe you'll figure out another way to do it. So there's no knowing with certainty that he'll do it unless you know for sure that he did it. Because perhaps he did it, perhaps he didn't. It's a suffix. And we know that when it comes to a deiraisa, suffix deiraisa l'chumra. So there's no way to know, and therefore we can't employ the chazaka. However, b'shal seifrim, when it comes to din d'rabbanan, then we do employ the chazaka shliach oiseh shlichusai. We say, well, certainly the person fulfilled the task that he was entrusted with. He did his job. So although there's some level of uncertainty, it's a suffix d'rabbanan, and we go l'kula. Perhaps let's take a look at Rashi inside. On the bottom of Lamed Aleph, 3 lines from the bottom, B'shal Torah in chazaka. So Rashi Koloima. He means to say, Lo samchina chazaka. We don't rely on this chazaka, on this assumption. Ada the chazin and the avad. Unless we know with certainty, we saw that he did the job, only then we know, but otherwise we can't make any assumptions. It says Rashi on top, B'shal Seifrim, when it comes to Adrabanan, Samchina Nacheska Shliach, then we do rely on the chazaka that the shliach performed the shlichus, of it, because at worst case scenario that he didn't do it, it's not so severe as the Rabbanan. Rashi gives us an example, Kegoin Eruvei Tchumen. So when it comes to establishing the Eruv, we can rely that the shliach performed the shlichus, as the Gemara told us earlier in Amud Aleph, that if you ask somebody to go wait for the katan to bring the Eruv, you can rely on him because chazaka shliach oiseh shlichusai, there's an assumption that he fulfilled the task that he committed himself to doing. So this is the shita of Rav Nachman when it comes to the Rabban. Yes, the Iraisa no. Continues the Gemara. Rav Sheshes Amar, whether the Iraisa or the Rabbanon, in both cases, yes, chazaka shliach oiseh shlichusai. He considers this chazaka to be a strong chazaka. It's not just a suffix like Rav Nachman suggests it is. Therefore, he says we can rely on this chazaka even when it comes to the Iraisa, and we can rely that he did the shlichus. Amar Sheshes Minah Minala. How do we know that this is the case? I'll bring you right from our Mishnah that we employ this chazaka even when it comes to din Torah. This not as we learned. Mishikar v'omer. Once the minchas ha'omer, which was brought on the 16th day of Nisan, once it was already brought, hutura chadash miyad. The new crop, the new grains can be consumed immediately. So once you see the carbon being brought, you don't need to wait any further. However, the ones who live at a distance from the Beis Hamikdash, from Yerushalayim, and they had no way of knowing the exact moment when the carbon was brought, says the Mishnah, Mutarim mechatzois hayam ve'elach. They are mutter to eat the new crop from the chatzois, from the midpoint of that day and on, because they rely on the kehanim, that they fulfilled their job, their task of bringing the minchas ha'omer. Once chatzois comes around, they know certainly it was taken care of, and they could eat the new crop. Says the Gemara, v'chadash da'raisahu. We're speaking about Isra Chadash, which is Isra Da'iraisa. Uktani, and the Mishnah tells us, the ones who live far away are mutter to eat the Chadash from midpoint and on, from Chatzais, when they know that the Kehanim had already brought the carbon. Now the Kehanim are the Shluchim, they're the emissaries of Klal Yisrael. Apparently we see, even when it comes to Isra Torah, we can be rest assured that the Shliach fulfilled his task. Lav Mishum is the reason not because Chazaka Shliach oiseh shlichusai. So we see clearly, says Rav Sheshes, even when it pertains to a din Torah, we can be rest assured that the Shliach fulfilled his task. So there's a Kasha of Nachman, who tells us by a din Torah we can rely on the Shliach. Answers the Gemara of Rav Nachman, he'll respond, Hasam. Over there, it's based on another reason. It's not a simple Shliach. Hasam Kedaktani Tama, as the Mishnah itself provides the reason. Because everybody knows that Bezdin, who's in charge of the Kohanim, of things things happening correctly, they'll take care of the minchas ha'omer. The Bezdin will make sure that it was brought and offered on the Mizbeach, and therefore the Rechakim rely on the Bezdin, not on the Shluchim. An ordinary Shliach perhaps is not reliable, but it's Bezdin that's getting involved here, and therefore we know Shein Bezdin Mis'aslan B'y. Bezdin are not lazy and lax when it comes to this, and therefore it's something that can be relied upon with certainty. There's another version of this Gemara that Rav Nachman actually brought a raya from this Mishnah to support his view that when it comes to Din Torah, you can't rely on a standard Shliach, because the Mishnah specifically tells us the reason there is because of Bezdin. Apparently, that's unique, because Bezdin is reliable, but an ordinary Shliach is not reliable. Some say, how do I know that this is true, that when it comes to a Din Torah, we cannot rely on your standard Shliach? Because the Mishnah specifically tells us the reason how the Minchas Omer can be relied upon, because they know that Bezdin are not mis'atzl, not lazy, not lax when it comes to this hakrava. Apparently it's because of that reason. Bezdin hu d'lo mis'atzl by. The Bezdin are not going to be lax when it comes to this carbon. Ha-shliach mis'atzl by. But an ordinary shliach would perhaps be lax and lazy and disregard his obligations, and therefore you cannot rely on a shliach. This actually is a writer of Nachman and a kasha of Sheshes, who tells us that even a shliach can be relied upon. It says Rav Sheshes, Amar, he'll respond to you. Even a ordinary shliach can be relied upon. The chiddush there is Bezdin al palga de yoyma, that when it comes to something that Bezdin is involved in, you can be sure that they'll take care of it by the time Chatzos comes around, by the time the palga de yoyma, half of the day comes around. And therefore the Rechakim know with certainty that from Chatzos and on they're mutter to eat a chadash. That's unique when it comes to Bezdin. They expedite things. There's reason. However, an ordinary shliach, perhaps he's not so diligent, but at the end of the day, he'll perform his task. Shliach kula yoyma. When it comes to an ordinary shliach, as long as you give him the entire day to perform his task, wait till the end of the day, then you can be rest assured he fulfilled his task. The chiddush here is that the Rechakim can be certain that when it came Chatzos, the Omer was already taken care of, and that is strictly due to the fact that Bezdin was involved. Because otherwise, they would have to wait until the end of the day to know with certainty that the Shliach, in this case the Kehanim, fulfilled their task. How do I know that my view is correct, that a Shliach can be relied upon even when it comes to a Din Torah? The Sanya, Ha'isha sheyesh alea leida, Oiziva. If an Isha has an obligation to bring a carbon upon her birth, upon the Leida, upon the Ziva days that have been completed, so she needs to bring a carbon of birds, Mevia Mois. So all she does is bring money, V'nesenes b'shofar, and throws it into the pushka, the shofar-shaped pushka which was in the Beis HaMikdash. She places the money there, knowing full and well that the Kohanim will take care of the carbon, they'll purchase some birds and bring it on the Mizbeach, and based on that assumption, she proceeds with Teveles. Now she's Toivel v'cheles b'kachim le'erev, and she could partake in eating kachim that very night, knowing that her carbon was already taken care of. My timer. Why? How can she rely on the Kohanim who are merely shluchim, they're emissaries? Lav mishum, is it not because we say damrinan chazaka shliachas shlichusay? So very clear that by a deraisa we rely on the shliach. So the kasha Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman will respond hasam k'd Rav Shmaya. The halacha there is based on Rav Shmaya. Once again, we employ the concept of Bezdin here. Dom Rav Shmaya? What is the reason the Isha can rely? Chazak ein Bezdin shel Kohanim. There's a chazak that the Bezdin of the Kohanim, meaning the ones who are in charge of the avodah there, they'll make sure they don't get up. Ein Bezdin shel Kohanim, they don't get up from their place. Ad sheyichlu kol moshe b'shofar, until all the money within the shofar was removed, was taken care of, was addressed, the birds were brought, the karbanos were taken care of. So it's Bezdin that she's relying upon, and they certainly are reliable and dependable. Amar Rav Sheshes min aminala. How do I know that when it comes to the Raisa we can't rely on the Shliach, the Sanya, as we learned in the Brais? Ha'omer l'chavera. If one person tells his friend, say, v'laket l'cha te'enim miteinasi, go ahead and you can pick some figs from my fig tree. Oichel men arai. So the person who picks the figs can go eat arai, meaning if he wishes simply to snack, to have an informal meal, that's mutter, because there's no chiv of Truma Meiser when it comes to just an achilas arai, since these figs were not yet nigmar malachtan. So at this point he can go ahead and eat arai, eat a informal meal, without separating the Trumas and Meisers. But when he decides to have a sudas kva, a permanent, a fixed meal, which at that point is a chiv of Truma and Maser, says the Brayso Ma'asher and Vadai. So at that point he has to separate the Trumas and Masers and treat it like Vadai Tevel. He knows with certainty that the figs here are obligated in Trumas and Masers. They're Vadai, they're certainly Tevel. Meaning, there's no reason, there's no even chance that the owner who owns the tree, had somehow addressed the chivim of Trumas and Masers here by doing him a favor and taking care of the maser by perhaps separating some maser from a different location to accommodate, to exempt these figs that he's picking. You know why? There's no chance that happened, because he doesn't even know how many he picked. He told him to go pick some figs. He didn't give him a quantity. So there's no chance that the owner had addressed the chiyuvim here. Therefore the picker has to be ma'aser vada. He has to treat and assume that there's a certain chiyuv here. It's vada chiyuv. What about the next case? So the owner tells him, fill up this kalkola, this basket, fill it up with figs from my fig tree. Now the owner knows, he quantified it. So now there's a chance perhaps that the owner addressed the chiyuvim, perhaps by separating the trumas and mashers from food that he had at home, to exempt, to accommodate this fellow. So once again, oichel men arai. When it comes to eating an achilas arai, a snacky meal, an informal meal, that's okay. There's no need to take care of the trumas and mashers. But once it gets down to a serious meal, where the chiyuv will apply, says the Brayso Ma'ashron Demai. He assumes that it's Demai. Demai is just another way of saying that it has suffix. Demai is the produce purchased from Amaretz, where there's some level of uncertainty as to whether the Amaretz had separated Tumas and Meisers. So there's a whole Masechta Demai. He needs to go ahead and address it somewhat. He needs to remove Tumas and Meisers, but in a suffix fashion. He's not meant to give the Maser Rishon to the Levi, Maser Ani to the poor person, because there's a suffix there. So this fellow who's going to pick these figs, after being instructed by the owner to fill up the basket, since there's some percentage of a chance that the owner, being that he knows the exact amount that he's picking, will try to accommodate the picker. The Gemara tells us we're speaking about Amaretz, who was picking the figs. So perhaps the owner wanted to accommodate him, wanted to make sure he doesn't do anything wrong, doesn't eat anything inappropriate. So therefore he's going to separate Tumas and Maises on his behalf. So there's some level of uncertainty here. That's what the Brayso says, so the picker does the Meiser, but assumes that it's only a suffix, whether or not it's Tevel. When will we say that in this second case, when he filled up the basket, he treats it as a suffix? Be'amharetz. When the owner was an Amaretz, unlearned fellow. So there's a concern that, on one hand, maybe he took care of the Tumas and Meisers, on the other hand, maybe not. Maybe he's not really too concerned about the picker eating something inappropriate, and he didn't take care of anything. Therefore, the picker needs to treat it as a suffix and separate just on the chance that he needs to do so. So that's only when the owner is Amaretz. Aval b'chaver? But if the owner, the one who instructed this fellow to pick, is a chaver. So chaver is a term used to classify a certain type of person who conforms behaviorally to certain types of guidelines which classify him as a chaver, makes him dependable and reliable. So if this person was a chaver, a trustworthy fellow, in this case, the picker can eat freely without any concerns of Meiser. Why? This is the sheet of Rebbe, who holds that if the owner is a chaver, he's not going to take chances. He's going to certainly do the Truma Meiser on behalf of the picker. He's going to feel responsible for him and feel obligated to prevent him from doing any Isser. So in this case, says Rebbe, there's no suffix whatsoever. Whether or not this thing was taken care of, certainly the chaver separated Trumas and Meisers even from the figs that he's going to pick, and therefore the picker has no need to be concerned. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, just the opposite. When does this halacha apply? That the picker needs to address these figs with uncertainty, he has to treat it as mai. When the owner was an amaretz, so there is some chance that perhaps he did accommodate the picker and remove the trumas and meiser. So there's a suffix. But if the owner is a chaver, who's meticulous about performing mitzvahs properly, in this case, just the opposite. The picker cannot eat unless he removes trumas and meisers. Not only does he do trumas and meisers, but he treats it as a vadai. He knows with certainty, without a shadow of doubt, that these figs are tevel. Why? Why is a chaver owner worse than amaretz? Says Rav Shimon Gamliel, because we know that the optimal way of separating trumas from meisers is minam mukaf, separating from something which is close by. To do something from long distance is not the optimal way of doing trumas from meisers. It's called shleim minam mukaf. It's not meant to do it. Some say it's the Rabbana, some say it's the Raisa. So says Rav Shimon Gamliel, there's no chance in the world that a chaver had separated trumas and meisers from a different location to address these figs. These fellows are not suspected of doing litram shleim and amukaf, to do truma from a distance. So there's no chance in the world that he took care of it. So therefore he says just the opposite. If the owner is a chaver, there's more reason to suspect that these figs being picked are tevel. Not only tevel, vadai tevel. So we have this machlekes. If the owner is a chaver, according to Rebbe, there's no concern whatsoever. According to Shimon Gamliel, just the opposite. In this case, we treat the figs as vadei tevel. Amar Rebbe, nirin dvaraim divrei Abba. My approach, that the chaver is to be dependent upon for the trumas and meisers, actually seems to be the more correct approach than my father's approach. His father was Shimon Gamliel. Why? Although I know that it's not optimal to go ahead and separate truma at a distance, but still he'll do it in order to prevent his friend, the amaretz, from doing something wrong. Mutav sheyachshadu chaverim. Better that the chaverim should be suspected of litram shleim amukaf, which the Gemara soon will tell us is a relatively small isser. Rather than do that, rather than they go ahead and feed or cause the amaretz to be fed tevel. So he's willing to sacrifice, so to speak, in order to safeguard the amaretz's spiritual well-being. Now, especially in this case, we're speaking that the amaretz, the chaver, in his mind, thinks the amaretz perhaps is relying on me. He thinks that if I give him something to eat, it's permissible, it's mutter. Therefore, he takes responsibility and he separates the truma meisers on his behalf. Okay, so this is machlekes between Rebbe and Shimon Gamliel regarding this specific question: would the chaver do the truma long distance or not? It says more ad kan lepligi. Now, the context of that machlekes is only pertaining to this specific detail. El demar savach nechshadu. Rebbe holds that the chaverim are suspected of doing this, meaning they'll go ahead and forego their less than optimal way of doing truma in order to accommodate the amaretz. The chaver wouldn't do it. Okay, so it's a specific question. But regarding the general question pertaining to al sugya, when somebody is being relied upon, a shliach, can we say, well, with certainty that he'll go ahead and perform his task? He's dependable, or perhaps not? Regarding that question, we seem to see from this brisa that a shliach is meant to be relied upon. Because this owner who instructed this fellow to pick the figs, it's like he's being a shliach because he knows that the picker depends on me. He thinks perhaps that the picker depends on him, and he expects him to give him something which is mutter, take care of the meiser. So we see from the brisa that a person who's being depended upon will come through, is meant to be trusted. It says all agree that we do apply this chazaka, that a shliach, somebody that's being depended upon, is trustworthy to fulfill his task. There's a kasha on Rav Nachman, because this is concerning truma meiser, which are rooted in Din Torah. So we see even when it comes to this, a shliach can be depended upon. So there's a kasha on Rav Nachman. Says more of Rav Nachman. He'll respond as follows. Hasam Rav Chanina Chuzah. The halacha there, why do we rely on the owner to address the chiyuvim of the fruit? It's based on Rav Chanina Chuzah's statement. It's unique, it's special. It's not your typical shliach. In that case, the owner feels especially responsible to take care of the fruit. The Amar of Chanina Chuzah, Chazakahu al Chaver, there's a chazaka that the Chaver will feel responsible. She'ena moitzi davar, she'ena masukim b'tachas yadeh. He won't allow something which is not permissible, something which is not appropriate to leave his possession. That's a unique case, where the owner feels personally responsible. It's my food. I'm feeding him something which is inappropriate. Therefore, in that case, certainly, he'll fulfill his obligation and make sure that what the Amaretz is eating is mutter. In contrast to your typical shliach, he's sent to do a task. Well, he thinks, he sent me, maybe he sent somebody else as well to cover up for me. Maybe he'll take care of it himself. He doesn't feel so personally responsible to fulfill that task, and therefore he's unreliable. Let's take a look at Rashi inside 10 lines from the bottom of the Amud. Beginning with the words mitachas yadeh. So the chaver will certainly be meticulous when it comes to something which is leaving his possession. To hoylo period deyu, since it's his fruit that he's providing, alei dedei rami. It's his responsibility. V'chayish alif iver. He's concerned about presenting a stumbling block in front of a blind person. So that's unique to this case. Never all agree the owner is to be relied upon. Aval shliach. But a typical shliach who accepted a task from his friend, there's room to think. He just gives up, he doesn't do it. The savar, he figures out, he's not really depending on me. He doesn't take it so seriously. Therefore, says Rav Nachman, when it comes to Din Torah, we can't rely on the shliach. There's some level of uncertainty whether they fulfill the task. We have to go to chumrah. But in our case, where the owner is providing this fruit, he feels personally responsible. He doesn't want to present a mirshal, a pitfall to his friend. Therefore, there's room to believe that he took care of the obligations. Okay, so in summary, when it comes to the question whether a shlich performs a shlichus, so when it concerns a din d'oraisa, Rav Nachman says he's unreliable. Shesha says he is. Concerning a din d'rabban, all agree you can rely on the shlich. All agree when a bezdin is involved, they're reliable. And the Gemara concluded regarding the chaver with the truma, he is too one to be dependent upon. Continues the Gemara. Amar, so we just learned in the Brisa. This was the case where he told him to fill up the basket, so he knows, he quantified the amount of figs. Therefore we say, there's some suffix here, that perhaps the owner took care of the Truma and Masr. Therefore the picker assumes it, treats it like a suffix when it comes to his obligations. When is it said that it's a suffix? If the owner is not Amaretz. If the owner is a chaver, he can eat freely without any concerns, because we assume that the owner took care of it. Says the Gemara, Hi Amaretz. So we spoke about an Amaretz owner. This Amaretz, the Karmelei Laman. Who is he speaking to? Who is he instructing to pick the figs? What type of person? Are we speaking at the Amaretz owner? Is speaking to the Amaretz, who's his friend. And we say, well, we speak to the picker and we say, well, there's a suffix here. We don't know if the owner took care of it. You must treat it as a suffix, as zmai, and remove the truma maestris misafik. Master and zmai? Mitzayis? The Amaretz, the picker, is he going to listen to us? He's an Amaretz just as the owner is an Amaretz. He trusts him. He wouldn't believe us. He wouldn't take our word seriously if when we tell him, you know, you purchased this, you got this from Amaretz. We don't know whether the owner was so meticulous, whether he felt responsible for you, and whether he took care of the Tumas or Maestris. Treat it as Demai. Go ahead and remove the Truma, misafik. Because the owner was only an Amaretz, he wasn't a Chaver. Well, if we're speaking to an Amaretz, he trusts the Amaretz owner. In his eyes, he's Amaretz, so the owner who's Amaretz is also very trustworthy. He won't listen to us. He won't think, well, the Amaretz owner didn't address the Chiyuvim properly. Only a Chaver does it, but not Amaretz. In his eyes, Amaretz is just like a Chaver. Meet size, will he listen to us? So apparently he can't be speaking about a case where we are addressing an Amaretz here, when the pig is Amaretz. Ella, apparently, but Amaretz the Karmelei Chaver. What happened was the Amoritz owner instructed a chaver to pick the figs. So now it makes sense. We tell the chaver who picked the figs, listen, you're not meant to rely on the owner. Perhaps he didn't address the chiyuvim here. Treat it as a suffix and be ma'aser these fruits as though it would be a dmai, because the Amoritz owner is not really somebody to rely upon. Perhaps he didn't really take responsibility and didn't take care of the Trumas and Maisus. So that makes sense. The owner is the Amoritz who instructed the chaver to pick. And now we turn to the chaver. We tell him, you must treat this fruit with uncertainty. Okay, so if that's the case, the owner was an Amoritz and the picker was a chaver, ema seifa. Let's proceed to the next case of the Brisa, where the Brisa told us that if the owner was a chaver, then things switch around, things change. That Rebbe tells us, when the owner is a chaver, we are certain that he took care of the chiyuvim, and the picker can eat it freely without any concerns. Let's proceed. The owner was a chaver. Niren devoraim divrei abba. So Rebbe says that the owner is reliable, and therefore the picker has no concerns. Niren devoraim divrei abba. My opinion seems to be more correct than my father's opinion. We can assume that the owner addressed the chiyuv of Trumas and Maasros. Why? Mutav sheyachshadu chaverim literally shalem na mukav. Better that the chaver should be suspected of doing something slightly inappropriate, to do the truma at a distance, shalem na mukav, which is not the best way, most preferred way of doing truma. Rather that he does that than risk feeding the Amoritz something inappropriate. Therefore, he's willing to do that. That's the shita of Rebbe. So if the owner is a chaver, you can rest assured that the picker was Amoritz need not be concerned, because the chaver, he looked after the well-being of the picker was Amoritz, made sure that he'll eat something only appropriate, make sure to take off Trumas and Maasros. 1 second. We just said that the picker was a chaver. And now we're saying the chaver is concerned about the picker was Amoritz? Or perhaps we'll just assume things are okay? Well, Amoritz might be awesome. What's the Amoritz doing here? I thought the picker was a chaver. So, in this part of the Brisa, which discusses picking a basketful, we have two cases which seem to be inconsistent. The first case seems to be speaking about a case where the Amoritz was the owner who instructed the chaver to pick the figs. And the next case we discussed the case where the owner was a chaver, but who was picking? This time it was Amoritz. Is the picker a chaver or Amoritz? Says Amar Avina, you're right. These two cases describe different scenarios. Reisha b'Amoritz sham l'chaver. The first case indeed was an Amoritz who instructed the chaver. Seifa, the second case was b'chaver sham Amoritz. Indeed was a chaver owner who instructed the Amoritz who picked the figs. So they reflect two different cases. So the Seifa was the owner who was a chaver who instructed the Amoritz. And therefore, it makes sense what Rebbe says. Well, let's assume that the chaver addressed the chiyuvim here because he's concerned for the safety and well-being of the picker was Amoritz. Perhaps he won't take the chiyuv too seriously, he'll eat something inappropriate, therefore he makes sure that what he eats is mutter. So he instructed Amoritz. Now, continues the Gemara, v'chaver achar shemay. There was another chaver standing there and listening into this conversation. Because, again, the entire context of our discussion, the fact that we say, well, this produce is chayav dmai, right? You have to treat it, you have to assume that there's some level of uncertainty regarding the status. That can only apply to a chaver, because a Amoritz doesn't take it too seriously. So when we speak about the person being allowed to eat it, apparently at the end of the day we're speaking about a chaver who would like to eat it, who comes to ask us a shayla, can I eat this fruit? So earlier in the Brisa we said, well, you must take care of it as though it's dmai. And in this case we say, well, since the owner was a chaver who instructed an Amoritz, in which case he's concerned about the Amoritz's well-being, he'll make sure to take care of the truma of Maaseh. And therefore now, when it pertains to the chaver who's coming to ask us, the Amoritz won't ask us, it's the chaver who's concerned. So what happened was there was a chaver listening into this conversation. Perhaps the Ritva says he was being fed by the Amoritz. So now he comes to the Rav, he wants to know, can I go ahead and eat this food without any concerns? V'chaver achar shemay. The other chaver was listening to the conversation. He wants to know whether he's allowed to eat this. Rebbe Savar, yes. This chaver who was listening to the conversation is being fed by the Amaretz, the picker. He can go and eat his fruit without any concerns. Why? The Vada Isuri Ma'aser. Certainly, the first chaver, the owner, Isuri Ma'aser. How chaver kama, the first chaver, meaning the owner, certainly took care of the Ma'aser Iluyah. Certainly he took care of the Ma'aser from these figs. So again, we're speaking about a case where the owner was a chaver. He instructed an Amaretz to pick a basket full of figs. So he quantified it. He knows how much is there. Rebbe maintains the chaver will be concerned about the safety and the well-being of the Amaretz. Or perhaps we'll just make assumptions and eat things based on assumptions that the owner took care of it. Therefore, the chaver does take care of it. He looks after it. Now, this entire halacha of the brisa, as the Gemara explained, really pertains to a chaver is coming to ask. Amaretz wouldn't come ask. He makes assumptions. He eats it freely. So apparently there was another chaver involved here as well. Although the picker was the Amaretz, but perhaps he was feeding it to another chaver, and that chaver wants to know what is the true status of this fruit. Says Rebbe, he can safely assume that this fruit is mutter, because since it was a chaver owner who was instructing the Amaretz to pick the fruit, he certainly would look after the well-being of the Amaretz, thinking perhaps the Amaretz is relying on me. I'm not going to give him something which is aser and have him eat something prohibited. Therefore, he goes ahead and does the truma and the ma'asos, even if it's shloim and amukov, even if it's at a great distance. It's not the optimal way of doing the truma. And the point is to prevent his friend from doing something wrong. So who's actually eating it? The Gemara says it's actually another chaver who's standing by, who's listening to this conversation. And then the Amaretz who picked the fruit offers him a fruit. He wants to know whether, he's meticulous. He wants to know whether he's allowed to go and eat it. He comes to the Rav and wants to know if this is mutter. The Rav says yes. Because since it was the chaver feeding the Amaretz, meaning he allowed the Amaretz to pick this fruit, he's going to look after him and make sure the fruit that was picked is kosher. So that's a Rebbe sheet. Rav Shimon Lielsav Omer, he holds no. Lo yoichal. This second chaver here should not take part in this fruit. Achi aser. Until he does maser with certainty. It's not a suffix. He knows for sure that this is tevel. Why? Because the chaver is not suspected of doing truma at a distance. Therefore, real holds when the owner is a chaver, you have no reason to believe that this fruit requires trumas and maasros with certainty as tevel vate. And Rebbe responded to him, no, better that you suspect the chaver of doing something slightly inappropriate, like removing the truma shleim and amukaf. He's willing to do that, rather than feed his friend something which is aser. Vayachilu ha'ma'aretz tvolim. Says the Gemara, Micah Miflagi. Well, what's the point of the disagreement? Says the Gemara as follows: Rebbe Savar. Rebbe holds nichalei lechaver. The chaver is willing to transgress a small isser, so to speak. To do isura kalila, to do a small isser, a relatively light isser, which is doing the truma shleim and amukaf. Some shittas hold it's the rabbanan, some shittas hold actually midaraisa, but it's not like eating tevel, which is misa. Therefore, he's willing to sacrifice spiritually for the sake of the Amaretz's spiritual well-being. Obviously, he's willing to do a issa kal so that Amaretz should be prevented from doing a grave issa. Let's see Rashi up on the top line, Isura Kalila, these small Isur, Shalom and Amukaf. Now doing the Truma at a distance, rather than the Amaretz eating the Tevel, which is Isur Rabba, Lechel Tvalim. So he's willing to do that. Therefore, we say that the Chaver addressed the Truma Meiser at a distance. And you could eat it with certainty. Continues the Gemara. Rab Shimon Lil Savar, he holds no. Nichale Lechaver, the La'avad Amaretz Isur Rabba. No, the Chaver is willing to accept the fact that the Amaretz will even do a grave Isur. The iu afilu isura kalilali of it, so that he himself should not transgress even a small isur. So it seems like Rebbe holds that this fellow is relying on me. He's picking my fruit. He thinks that I'm going to take care of the spiritual aspect of his fruit as well. He's fully relying on me and depending on me. Therefore, I can't let him down. I must be willing to do even an isur kal to prevent him from isur chamer. Where the Shimon Leil holds, perhaps he's not so reliant on me. He got to pick my fruit. I didn't tell him. It's kasha fruit. It's off a tree. Why should he think that it's not tevel? Therefore, I'm not willing to do even a small isser in order to prevent him from doing a gravis. So in summary, we have a brisa and two parts to the brisa. The brisa begins by discussing a case where a person says, "Laket l'cha teinim, mitei nasi." He doesn't give him a quantity. He just says, "Pick some figs." In this case, the owner, since he doesn't know how much he's picking, there's no chance they did anything regarding the Truma Maser. We're speaking about an Amaret's owner who instructed the Chaver to pick those dates, those figs, and the Chaver comes to the Rav and wants to know, what is the halacha? The halacha is, he's chayav vadai. He must treat it as vadai tevel. There's no chance in the world that it's not. In the seif of the brisa we have kalkol zu. He instructed him to fill up a basket full of figs. He quantified it. In this case, there's some element of uncertainty. Perhaps the owner will address the chiyuvim of trumas and maasros. So we have two cases in the seifa of the brisa. We have a case where the Amaret's owner instructed the chaver to pick those figs, and the chaver must treat it as a suffix, because perhaps the owner addressed the obligations. So it's chayiv and ma'aser, it's only misafik. Whereas when the owner was a chaver who instructed an Amaretz to pick those figs, as the Gemara told us, there was another chaver standing by listening to the conversation, and the chaver would like to know what is the status of this fruit picked by the Amaretz. Now we have a machlekes. According to Rebbe, he's certainly potter, because the chaver will certainly address the obligations. He doesn't want the Amaretz who's picking to do any avera. Whereas the Shimon Leil holds just the opposite. In this case, when the owner was a chaver, he's fully knowledgeable about the halachas. He's meticulous about doing the truma properly. He won't separate the truma at a distance, shleiman amukah, which is not the proper way of doing it. And therefore, the picker must assume that it's a vadai tevel and be mafresh the trumas and maasros with certainty. Continues the Mishnah, getting back to the halacha of erev tchumen. So it's placing the food at a certain location that becomes your Mokim Shvisa, your Shabbos residence, allowing you to walk from there 2,000 Amma. And the point is that the food creates the dira. That's your source of sustenance, of livelihood. The Mokim of the Muslim becomes the Mokim of the dira. Now, what results from this is that the food needs to be very close proximity to the Mokim Shvisa in order to accomplish the Mokim Shvisa. Now, how close does it really have to be? We're going to see in our Mishnah and the upcoming Gemara. Says the Mishnah, let's say he placed the food of the Erev up on a tree. If it's above 10 tfachim on the tree, the Erev is not valid. If it's below 10 tfachim, Erev, it's perfectly fine. The Gemara will explain for us the background and the context of this Mishnah. Continues the Mishnah, the son of a boy placed it in a pit, even if it's 100 amas deep, Erev, it works fine. Says the Gemara, Yosef, the following Amoraim, was sitting, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Asi, Rabbi bar Nasan, Yosef Rav Nachman Gabai. In addition to them, Rav Nachman was also sitting by, V'yasvi Ka'amri, and he was sitting and saying the following. They were analyzing the Mishnah. The Mishnah speaks about a case where he places the Erev on a tree. Above 10 tfachim it doesn't work, below 10 tfachim it works. Hi Ilan, this tree discussed in the Mishnah, where was it situated? Shall we say the Kai B'Shasar Yachid? It was sitting in a B'Shasar Yachid, a place enclosed by Bechitzos. Mali Lamala, Mali Lamata. If so, what difference does it make if the air was placed above 10 or below 10? If it's in a B'Shasar Yachid, the B'Shasar Yachid domain extends upward from ground till sky. It's all one Rishus. B'Shasar Yachid, Oila Adler Rakia. It goes all the way up to the sky. So the air, whether it's placed up on the tree or down on the bottom portion of the tree, it's all one area. It's all one Rosh Hashanah. So it's irrelevant. Apparently the tree was situated in the Rosh Hashanah. Says the Gemara, okay, where did this person intend on making the Makom Shvisa, establishing his residence? Where? On the floor, on the tree, where? Shall we say that he intended on establishing a shvisa up on the tree near the Erev? Then there's no concern. Him, meaning the Makam Shvisa, his residence, and the Erev is in one place. So what's the problem? Ella must be the Neskaven Lishbeis Lamat, that he intended on establishing his shvisa down below at the foot of the tree, at the base of the trunk. So that's where his shvisa is. So that creates concerns, because if the Erev is below 10 tefachim, so it's together with him. He's in Rosh Hashanah, and his food is together with him in the airspace of Rosh Hashanah. It's below 10, it's within 10 to the ground, it's Rosh Hashanah. But if he placed it lamala ma'asara, above 10 tefachim, which is a rishus hayachid, because we're speaking about a tree which is 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide, so he placed it up in a different domain. His shvisa is down at the base of the tree, which is Rosh Hashanah. His food is up in Rosh Hashanah. He has no access to it. He can't conceivably retrieve that food during Ben Hashmashis, when the Erev takes effect. Therefore, it doesn't work. But if he was miskaven lishbois lamata, if he intended on establishing a shvisa at the base of the tree, and the Erev food is on the tree but below 10 tefachim, meaning within the airspace of Rosh Hashanah, that's okay, because they're both in Rosh Hashanah. Says the Gemara, Ellen is skaven lishbois lamata, v'okam mishtamish b'ilan. Okay, the food is in the same rishus as this fellow. But there's another problem. He can't remove it off the tree. One is not meant to use a tree on Shabbos. Midrabanan, perhaps there's a concern he might pull up some branches. So he doesn't really have access to his Erev during the onset of Shabbos, the Ben Hashmashas moment, when the Erev is meant to take a hold and take effect. So this also poses a problem. So even if he's in Rosh Hashanah, the Erev is within 10 tefachim and is also in Rosh Hashanah, but he can't get it off the tree. There's no access to it. So how can that food create a makam shvisa? Says Gemara, he's using the tree. Actually, we're speaking that he's in Rosh Hashanah. Sorry, means, yes, actually the tree is situated in Rosh Hashanah. And he intended on establishing the shvisa down below at the base of the tree. What about pulling the food off the tree? For Rebbe, we're following Shittas Rebbe, the Amar said, called Davar Shum Mishum Shvus. Anything which involves an Issa D'Rabbanan. Shvus is describing the Issa D'Rabbanan on Shabbos. For instance, pulling something off a tree. That doesn't apply to Ben Hashmashis. So at the onset of Shabbos, meaning when the Erev is meant to take hold, during the twilight period between Friday and Shabbos, at that point in time, there's no Issa D'Rabbanan to use a tree. So since he has access to the Erev, at that moment, the Erev can take hold. So according to this approach, we're speaking about a tree which was in Rosh Hashanah. His shvisa was at the base of that tree. So if the Erev was on the tree above 10 tefachim, which is a Rosh Hashanah, it's invalid, because he's in Rosh Hashanah. His Erev is in a different Rosh Hashanah. He has no access to it when the Erev is meant to take effect. Whereas if it's lamata masara, if it's below 10 tefachim, within 10 tefachim of the ground, which is the airspace of Rosh Hashanah, then that's okay. How can he get it off the tree? During Ben Hashmash, there's no Isra of using the tree. Amalu Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman heard this interpretation. He responded, Yeshar, correct. V'chein Shmuel. This is exactly how Shmuel interpreted the Mishnah. Amalei. So he responded to him, Pasrisu ba kuli hai. Have you interpreted and analyzed this Mishnah to this extent? He says, what do you mean? Inunami. Hachika pasriba. They as well analyzed it to this extent. What was their surprise? Ella hachi amrle. This is what they told him. Kavisa le b'gemara, that you actually establish this pshat of the Mishnah in your Gemara to pass it on to the generations as pshat in the Mishnah. Amalu in, yes, indeed, this is the correct approach, and this was established in the Gemara. It's Marnami, we learned likewise on Rav Nachman Shmuel. Hacha be'ilan. Our Mishnah speaking about a tree, ha'im Rosh Hashanah, which was situated in Rosh Hashanah, Askina. Gavoya asar bracha abba, it was 10 tefachim high, at a surface area 4 wide, and he intended on establishing his shvisa down below at the base of the tree. So if the Erev is above on the tree, above 10 tefachim, there's a concern, because it's shayachid. If it's below 10, it's okay. How is he going to access the food from the tree? And the Issa D'Rabbanan on Shabbos, doesn't apply to Ben Hashmashos. So this Erev works fine, because he has access to the food during Ben Hashmashos. Amarab, Lo Yishanu. When the Mishnah tells us that the tree which is in Rosh Hashanah and his makam shvisa is at the trunk, the base of the tree, and the Erev is above 10 Tfachim, it doesn't work. Leishana, this is only said Ela be'ilon ha'omeid chutz libur shalir, regarding a tree which is sitting out in the wilderness, outside the Ibur of the ear. So we have the city and we have the Ibur, like a pregnant woman. The Ibur is the extension of the city, which is about 70 Tfachim outside the city. So the municipal boundaries, the halachic boundaries of the city, extend up until that point, until the Ibur. That's considered to be part of the city. So if the tree is sitting outside that area, out in the middle of nowhere, then the halach of the Mishnah is applicable. Aval ilan ha'omed b'seichi bura shalir. But if the tree is situated within the municipal boundaries, then afilu lemala ma'asara hariz erev. Even if the erev is above 10 tefachim, it is perfectly fine. Why? The masa commanded mal yadamya, because a city, entire city, is considered as though it's filled up with homes, filled up with earth, because it's one large residential area. We regard it, in the context of Erev Tchumen, of course, as though it's one large residential area. Not only the city, but even the Ibur, the extension of that city, is considered to be one unified unit of residence. And therefore, says Rava, when this fellow who established his residence at the base of that tree, and this tree is in the confines of the city, we view the entire as though it's filled up, as though his residency extends upward for 10 tfachim. So you can reach that Erev. He's sitting on 10 tfachim off the ground. So the Erev is not inaccessible any longer. He's in Rosh Hashanah, the Erev is Rosh Hashanah, and everything is fine. Because again, the point is that within a city, it's all filled up, it's all one residency. Therefore, his shvisa at the base of that tree extends upward. And he is together with the Erev in the same location. Says the Gemara Yachi. So based on this concept, chutz libur shalir nami, even if it's outside the Ibur of the city, you can also apply the same concept. Why? Since Rava told us, Maseches Eruvin, when one places food for the Erev Tchumen, yesh lo arba amos. The Erev, the food extends for 4 amos. Meaning 4 amos next to that food is considered to be like a Rosh Hashanah. It's a place of residence. So if every makam shvisa of Erev Tchumen is considered like a Rosh Hashanah, like a place of private residence, so when he's sitting under this tree, which is sitting out in the wilderness, but his makam shvisa is the daled amos of Rosh Hashanah, which extends upwards. We know that Rosh Hashanah is adler rakia, goes up all the way to the heaven. So it extends upwards until he gets to the Erev, which is on top of the tree. Him and the Erev are in one singular space. If so, the place of the Erev is considered like a shayachet, like a private area. We know that shayachet extends upward until the rakia. So even when the tree discussed here is sitting out in the wilderness, outside of the municipal boundaries of a city, well, nowhere. But if he was keveya shvisa, established his shvisa at the base of that tree, any person who establishes shvisa, that makam shvisa, that personal space, is like a Rosh Hashanah, according to Rav. There's 4 amas of Rosh Hashanah there, and Rosh Hashanah goes upward till the rakia. So the Erev is up high on the tree. His makam shvisa extends upward till he reaches that Erev. If so, him and the Erev are contained in one singular space. So what's the concern of the Mishnah? Why, if he places the Erev up high on the tree, is the Erev not good? Omar Yitzchak Breda Mashash. You're right. Hacha, however, in this case we're speaking about Bi'ilon ha'noite chutz la'arba ames askinan. We're speaking about a tree which has a branch, which is extending horizontally from the trunk of the tree, past 4 amas of the base of the tree, of the trunk of the tree. So he establishes shvisa at the base of the trunk. He places Erev where? On the branch, which is extending past 4 amas from the trunk of the tree. So it's past his makam shvisa. His makam shvisa is here. The Erev is past his makam shvisa. It's not on the same airspace as his makam shvisa, and therefore it's inaccessible to him. Since the Erev is up on the tree, which is Shusayachet, and he is the Rosh Hashanah. So again, we're speaking about the tree which is protruding, leaning past, extending past 4 amis of the the trunk of the base of the tree, and he intended on establishing his makom shvisa bikari at the base of the tree, down below in Rosh Hashanah. Now, although we just mentioned that the makom shvisa is considered Rosh Hashanah, explains Rashi, we don't literally mean that it's a Rosh Hashanah for the sake of haitzah, allowing to carry on Shabbos, because it's not an enclosed area. It really means that it's his personal residential space. But literally speaking, he's in Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, the Mishnah tells us as follows. When we have a tree, and shvisa is down below in Rosh Hashanah, we have that branch which extends way past the trunk. So the Erev is placed not above the airspace of the makom shvisa. It depends. Says the Mishnah. If he places it on a branch which is within 10 tefachim to Rosh Hashanah, then you're okay, because the Erev and the person are both in Rosh Hashanah. Whereas if he places it on a higher branch, a branch which is above 10 tefachim, which is Rosh Hashanah, then it's no good, because the Erev is Rosh Hashanah, whereas the person is Rosh Hashanah. Says the Gemara, Umay lamala, umay lamata. Now the Gemara is going to have a semantics concern. The wording of the Mishnah seems a bit difficult. The word lamala lamata denote that we're speaking about the same thing. For instance, you have a trunk of a tree, and lamala is the upper location of that trunk. Lamata is the lower location. Lamala lamata are referring to two locations in one object. Now here we're speaking about a question of whether he placed it on the lower branch or the upper branch. As Rashi explains, the term namach and gavaya would be more appropriate. Namach describing the lower branch, and gavaya the upper branch. Lamala lamata seem to be both speaking about the same one and the same object, two locations within that object. Umay lamala umay lamata. Says more the hadar zakif. Actually, we're speaking about the same object, the same branch, which it comes out of the trunk at a low point, within 10 tefachim to the ground, and then hadar zakif, it bends upward, reaching beyond 10 tefachim. So it's actually the same branch we're speaking about. The question is, did he place the Erev lamata, on the lower portion of that branch, within 10 tefachim to the ground, which is Rosh Hashanah, or lamala, on the upper portion of that branch, which is Rosh Hashanah, in which case is in a different location than the person. Says the Gemara, okay, but if he would like, Maislo derech Olav, he has access to his Erev, even if he places it on the upper location of that branch, which is Shayachid, but he can go ahead and transport that Erev during the moment of Ben Hashmashes to his location. How? He's going to take the Erev from the upper portion, which is Shayachid, over the airspace of the lower portion of that branch, which is a Karmelis, over to the trunk of the tree, which is considered like Rosh Hashanah, and it's above his makom shvisa. It's within the airspace of his makom shvisa. So since he can do that ben hashmashes, let's consider the air to be fully accessible and kosher. Says Gemara, there's a problem. We're speaking in a case where the lower portion of that branch was being used by the Ram, by the public, to be makativ, to adjust their loads on it, and therefore has a din of Rosh Hashanah. So the airspace above that lower portion is considered Rosh Hashanah airspace. And that prevents him from transferring from the upper portion of that branch, which is Sayachid, over to the trunk, which is Sayachid, through the airspace of Rosh Hashanah, which is not allowed. Ukdula Azula told us, the Amar Ula, Amud Tisha Rosh Hashanah. If you have a post which is 9 tefachim high in Rosh Hashanah, Rabbim Makatfanalav, it's used for the Rabbim to be Makatav, to adjust the loads on it. That's considered Rosh Hashanah. V'zorak v'nachal gabav chayv, one throws onto that post, he's chayv, because it's considered to be Rosh Hashanah, and that explains Halacha Now Mishnah. Therefore, he can't transport above the airspace of this branch, which is the Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, placing it on the upper portion of that branch, which is Sayachet, when the owner is sitting down Rosh Hashanah, it's inaccessible to him, and therefore the Erev is invalid. So in summary, we spoke about a tree which is situated in Rosh Hashanah. The fellow had intended on establishing his shvisa down below in Rosh Hashanah. Mishnah tells us, if the Erev is accessible to him, if it's within 10 tefachim in Rosh Hashanah, then it's okay. But if it's above 10 tefachim in Rosh Hashanah, he's in one Rishus, the Erev is in another, and therefore it's inaccessible to him and cannot be used for the Erev. Okay, time for a brief review of today's daf. We began discussing the halach of shliach oisei shlichusa. Can one depend on a shliach to fulfill his task properly? According to Rav Nachman, when it comes to the Iraisa, no. To Rabbanan, yeah. According to Rav Sheshes, in both cases, is reliable. All agree that a bezdin is reliable. Or in a case where a chaver allows the Amaris to consume his figs, In this case, he assumes responsibility for the Amoritz, and certainly he will address the Truma Meiser from those figs. We learned in a Brisa that if an Amoritz tells a Chaver to pick some figs, so if he didn't quantify the amount of figs, then we can assume it's Vadai Tevel. But if he quantified it, he said, fill up this basket, then it depends. If the owner is an Amoritz, then we have a suffix. Perhaps the owner did do the Meiser for him, therefore he must treat it as a suffix Tevel. If the owner is a Chaver, Rabbi says in this case we can safely assume that the Chaver removed the Tumas or Meisers for the sake of the Amoritz, therefore it's Pater. According to Shimon Gamliel, just the opposite. In the case where the owner is a Chaver, we can safely assume he did not do the Truma Meiser at a distance. We learned about a case where a person placed an Erev Tchumen on a tree. So the tree was in Rosh Hashanah, and he intended on establishing his Shvisa down at the base of the tree, which is Rosh Hashanah. So if the Erev is above, beyond Tantfachim, which is Sayachet, that won't work. But if it's within the airspace of Rosh Hashanah, then he and his Erev are both Rosh Hashanah, and the Erev is kosher.